Hey guys, Rob and Georgia here with you, aka VHS 82 apostrophe, with another episode in my ongoing reading of H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Re-Animator from 1922, as it was published in 6 separate pieces for Home Brew, which was more of a humorous pulp piece that was definitely leaning on the humorous side, which makes it kind of humorous in itself that Lovecraft would be asked to contribute a horror piece. But he was told, as he says, don't make it too gruesome, not too morbid. Hotman, I think it was his name, the guy who founded Home Brew in 1921, perhaps. So it's a fairly new publication. And one that Lovecraft, although he was not happy to produce for change, money, this is not what he wanted to do, as he often said, born about 200 years too late, I think. I kind of feel like that sometimes myself. But anyways, so we just have episode 5 and episode 6, and Re-Animator will be complete. And I did revisit, as fortune would have it, I revisited Re-Animator. And it might be the single best viewing I have ever had of that film. And maybe it's just because I've really saturated myself of late with these various pieces that in total make up Herbert West Re-Animator. I saw a lot of things in there in the movie. It really does spiritly flesh out the original source material in an interesting way. You can tell Stuart Gordon was keen on paying respect, and I guess I never saw that before. Really, not like now. So that's interesting. Anyways, I thought to start off, of course, continue what I started with from I Am Providence, The Life and Times of H.P. Lovecraft by S.T. Joshi. Just as sort of a summary recap of where we've been and where we're headed. The 6 episodes show West producing more and more hideous instances of reanimation. In the first, West injects a serum in a corpse, but it seems to produce no results. The 2 doctors bury the corpse in Potter's Field, only to learn later that it came to life after all. In the second, West impiously decides to resurrect Dr. Alan Halsey, who is head of the medical school. Also, I might add, father of Dean Cain, or for us, the narrator, but in Re-Animator and Bride, Bruce Abbott's character, Barbara Crampton played her, his daughter, which was his love of affection in the film, which he does not have in the stories, mind you. In the second, West impiously decides to resurrect Dr. Alan Halsey, who is head of medical school, had vigorously opposed West's experiments and had died in a typhoid epidemic that raged through Arkham. The creature is caught and locked up in Sefton Asylum. In the third, West and the narrator have set up practice in a small Massachusetts town of Bolton and attempt to resurrect the body of a black man, an amateur boxer named Buck Robinson, the Harlem Smoke, but seem to find that the serum prepared from experience with white specimens only will not work on black corpses. Later they learn otherwise. In the fourth episode, the narrator, returning from a vacation with his parents in Illinois, find West in a state of unusual excitement. He has designed an embalming fluid that will preserve a corpse in the state of freshness indefinitely, and claims that a traveling salesman who had come to visit West had died unexpectedly and would therefore serve as a perfect specimen because of the freshness of the corpse. When it is reanimated, the narrator finds that West's account of the matter is perhaps not wholly inaccurate, or not wholly accurate. The fifth episode takes us to the horrors, and that is today's episode, of the Great War, World War I, where West and the narrator have enlisted in a Canadian regiment in 1915. West now seeks to put into practice still more eccentric views on the reanimation of the dead, and does so in a loathsome manner. Again, from I Am Providence, The Life and Times of H.P. Lovecraft by one S.T. Joshi. And again, from another Joshi work, Lovecraft and and A World of Transition collected essays deep within reality and knowledge. Just happens to be a couple little quotes here, but one I want to zero in on for this particular episode. The one dealing with the Great War. I thought the quote from Danforth from At the Mountains of Madness is quite appropriate. Here it is. It is absolutely necessary for the peace and safety of mankind that some of Earth's dark, dead corners and unplumbed depths be let alone, lest sleeping abnormalities wake to resurgent life and blasphemously surviving nightmares squirm and splash out of their black layers to newer and wider conquests. Quite appropriate, I think, for the battlefield that is World War I. Herbert West, Re-Animator. Again, published as a six pieces in Home Brew 1922. Yeah, let's get into this. Part 5, The Horror from the Shadows. Many men have related hideous things not mentioned in print which happened on the battlefields of the Great War. Some of these things have made me faint, others have convulsed me with devastating nausea, while still others have made me tremble and look behind me in the dark. Yet despite the worst of them, I believe I can relate the most hideous thing of all, the shocking, the unnatural, the unbelievable horror from the shadows. In 1915, I was a physician with the rank of first lieutenant in a Canadian regiment in Flanders. One of the many Americans to precede the government itself into the gigantic struggle. I had not entered the army on my initiative, but rather as a natural result of the enlistment of the man whose indispensable assistant I was, the celebrated Boston surgical specialist, Dr. Herbert West. Dr. West had been avid for a chance to serve as a surgeon in the Great War, and when the chance had come, he carried me with him almost against my will. There were reasons why I would have been glad to let the war separate us, reasons why I found the practice of medicine and the companionship of West more and more irritating. But when he had gone to Ottawa and through a colleague's influence secured a medical commission as major, I could not resist the imperious persuasion of one determined that I should accompany him in my usual capacity. When I say that Dr. West was avid to serve in battle, I do not mean to imply that he was either naturally warlike or anxious for the safety of civilization. Always an ice-cold intellectual machine, slight, blonde, blue-eyed, spectacled, I think he secretly sneered at my occasional martial enthusiasms and censors of supine neutrality. There was, however, something he wanted in embattled Flanders, and in order to secure it, he had to assume a military exterior. What he wanted was not a thing which many persons want, but something connected with a peculiar branch of medical science which he had chosen quite clandestinely to follow, in which he had achieved amazing and occasionally hideous results. It was, in fact, nothing more or less than an abundant supply of freshly killed men in every stage of dismemberment. Herbert West needed fresh bodies because his life work was the reanimation of the dead. This work was not known to the fashionable clientele who had so swiftly built up his fame after his arrival in Boston, but was only too well known to me, who had been his closest friend and sole assistant since the old days at Miskatonic University Medical School at Arkham. It was in these college days that he had begun his terrible experiments, first on small animals and then on human bodies shockingly obtained. There was a solution which he injected into the veins of dead things, and if they were fresh enough, they responded in a strange way. He had much trouble in discovering the proper formula for each type of organism was found to need a stimulus especially adapted to it. Terror stalked him when he reflected on his partial failure. Nameless things resulting from an imperfect solutions or from bodies insufficiently fresh. A certain number of these failures had remained alive. One was in an asylum while others had vanished, and as he thought of conceivable yet virtually impossible eventualities, he often shivered beneath his usual stolidity. West had soon learned that absolute freshness was prime requisite for useful specimens, and had accordingly resorted to frightful and unnatural expedients in body snatching. In college, and during our early practice together in the factory town of Bolton, my attitude toward him had been largely one of fascinated admiration. But as his boldness and methods grew, I began to develop a gnawing fear. I did not like the way he looked at healthy living bodies, and then there came a nightmare session in the cellar laboratory when I learned that a certain specimen had been a living body when he secured it. That was the first time he had ever been able to revive the quality of rational thought in a corpse, and his success, obtained at such a loathsome cost, had completely hardened him. Of his methods in intervening 5 years I dare not speak. I was held to him by sheer force of fear, witnessed sights that no human tongue could repeat. Gradually I came to find Herbert West himself more horrible than anything he did. That was when it dawned on me that his once normal scientific zeal for prolonging life had subtly degenerated into a mere morbid and ghoulish curiosity and secret sense of carnal picturesqueness. His interest became a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. He gloated calmly over artificial monstrosities which would make most healthy men drop dead from fright and disgust. He became, behind his pallid intellectuality, a fastidious Baudelaire, a physical experiment, a languid Elagabalus of the tombs. Dangers he met unflinchingly, crimes he committed unmoved. I think the climax came when he had proved his point that rational life can be restored, and had sought new worlds to conquer by experimenting on the reanimation of detached parts of bodies. He had wild and original ideas on the independent vital properties of organic cells and nerve tissue separated from natural physiological systems, and achieved some hideous preliminary results in the form of never dying, artificially nourished tissue obtained from the nearly hatched eggs of indescribable tropical reptile. Two biological points he was exceedingly anxious to settle. First, whether any amount of consciousness and rational action might be possible without the brain, proceeding from the spinal cord and various nerve centers. And second, whether any kind of ethereal, intangible relation indistinct from the material cells may exist to link the surgically separated parts of what was previously been a single living organism. All his research work required a prodigious supply of freshly slaughtered human flesh, and that was why Herbert West had entered the Great War. The phantasmal, unmentionable thing occurred one midnight late in March 1915 in a field hospital behind the lines at St. Eloi. I wonder even now if it could have been other than a demonic dream of delirium. West had a private laboratory in the east room of a barn-like temporary edifice assigned to him in his plea that he was devising new and radical methods for the treatment of hitherto hopeless cases of maiming. There he worked like a butcher in the midst of the gory wares. I could never get used to the levity with which he handled and classified certain things. At times he actually did perform marvels of surgery for the soldiers, but his chief delights were of a less public and philanthropic kind, requiring many explanations of sounds which seemed peculiar even amidst that babel of the damned. Among those sounds were frequent revolver shots, surely not uncommon on a battlefield, but distinctly uncommon in a hospital. Dr. West's reanimated specimens were not meant for long existence or a large audience. Besides human tissue, West employed much of the reptile embryo tissue, which he had cultivated with such singular results. It was better than human material for maintaining life in an organless fragment, and that was now my friend's chief activity. In a dark corner of the laboratory, over a queer incubating burner, he kept a large covered vat full of this reptilian cell matter which multiplied and grew puffily and hideously. On the night of which I speak, we had a splendid new specimen, a man at once physically powerful and of such high mentality that his sensitive nervous system was assured. It was rather ironic, for he was an officer who had helped West to his commission, who was now to have been our associate. Moreover, he had in the past secretly studied the theory of reanimation to some extent under West. Major Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee, DSO, was the greatest surgeon in our division and had been hastily assigned to the St. Eloi sector when news of the heavy fighting reached headquarters. He had come in an aeroplane piloted by the intrepid Lieutenant Ronald Hill, only to be shot down when directly over his destination. The fall had been as spectacular and awful. Hill was unrecognizable afterward, but the wreck yielded up the great surgeon in a nearly decapitated but otherwise intact condition. West had greedily seized the lifeless thing which had once been his friend and fellow scholar, and I shuddered when he finished severing his head, placed his hellish in a hellish vat of pulpy reptile tissue to preserve it for future experiments, and proceeded to treat the decapitated body on the operating table. He injected new blood, joined certain veins, arteries, nerves at the headless neck, and closed the ghastly aperture with a grafted skin from an unidentified specimen which had been born in an officer's uniform. I knew what he wanted, to see if this highly organized body could exhibit, without its head, any of the signs of mental life which had distinguished Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee. Once a student of reanimation, this silent trunk was now gruesomely called upon to exemplify it. I can still see Herbert West under the sinister electric light as he injected his reanimating solution into the arm of the headless body. The scene I cannot describe. I should faint if I tried, for there is a madness in the room full of classified carnal things which blood and lesser human debris, almost ankle deep on a slimy floor, and with hideous reptilian abnormalities sprouting, hubbling, baking over a winking bluish-green specter of dim flame in a far corner of black shadows. The specimen, as West repeatedly observed, had a splendid nervous system. Much was expected of it, and as few twitching motions began to appear, I could see the feverish interest in West's face. He was ready, I think, to see proof of his increasingly strong opinion that consciousness, reason, personality can exist independently of the brain, that man has no central connective spirit, but is merely a machine of nervous matter, each section more or less complete in itself. In one triumphant demonstration, West was about to relegate the mystery of life to the category of myth. The body now twitched more vigorously, and beneath our avid eyes commenced to heave in a frightful way. The arms stirred disquietingly, and the legs drew up, and various muscles contracted in a repulsive kind of writhing. Then the headless thing threw out its arms in a gesture which was unmistakably one of desperation, an intelligent desperation apparently sufficient to prove every theory of Herbert West. Certainly the nerves were recalling the man's last act in life, the struggle to get free of a falling aeroplane. What followed? I shall never positively know. It may have been wholly an hallucination from the shock caused at the instant by the sudden and complete destruction of the building in a cataclysm of German shell fire. Who can gainsay it, since West and I were the only proved survivors? West liked to think that before his recent disappearance, but there were times when he could not, for it was queer that we both had the same hallucination. The hideous occurrence itself was very simple, notable only for what it implied. The body on the table had risen with a blind, terrible groping, and we had heard a sound. I should not call that sound a voice, for it was too awful, and yet its timbre was not the most awful thing about it. Neither was its message. It had merely screamed, "Jump, Ronald! For God's sake, jump!" The awful thing was its source, for it had come from a large covered vat in that ghoulish corner of a crawling black shadows. End of part 5, entitled The Horror from the Shadows, part of H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Re-Animator. So real quick, I did want to point out one specific paragraph. Two things real quick. One real quick. Towards the end, he does mention at times he actually referring to Lovecraft, West. At times he actually did perform marvels of surgery for the soldiers, but his chief delights were of less public and philanthropic kind, requiring many explanations of sounds which seemed peculiar even amidst of the babble of the damned. So it's interesting that even in the midst of dismemberment, bodies, gore, he actually did help. This is shown ever so slightly in the opening moments of Bride when they're in the Peruvian Civil War. And he does help Dean or Dan Kane, Bruce Savage's character. And so it kind of throws a slight little nod that there is a bit of humanity in it, not much, as I'm about to show here. There is one paragraph that if one delves deeper into it, it is the one that mentions a French poet, Baudelaire. The end of the paragraph in question is the one where we find his interest became a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. He gloated calmly over artificial monstrosities which would make most healthy men drop dead from fright and disgust. He became behind him a pallid intellectuality, a fastidious Baudelaire, a physical experiment, a languid illegalibalis of the tombs. Just a little deep look, you find that Baudelaire, a fastidious Baudelaire, is actually a old French poet, a contemporary, I guess, of Edgar Allan Poe, if I remember, or not much behind him. Anyways, this French poet had a nasty, nasty reputation. In fact, if you were to take the meaning of Baudelaire, fastidious Baudelaire, you get this idea of an Elagabalus of the tombs. If you kind of take that whole sentence in, you sort of kind of get this idea of a spiritless god of the mountain of the tombs. Let me just say that one more time. A spiritless god of the mountain of the tombs. This is Herbert West. This might be the single best description of what this creature, this character, this one who stands before God in defiance and determined to take over the reins of creation. It's funny, this poet Baudelaire had many rivals who went after him, but maybe the most interesting was one by the name of Hebes, J. Hebes, I think it was. He had said of Baudelaire, and again, I think this is a fitting description of Herbert West. Perfect. He said in when thinking of Baudelaire, he said, everything in which is his poetry, everything in it which is not hideous is incomprehensible. Everything one understands is putrid. If that's not a perfect description of Herbert West and who he is, a spiritless god of the mountain of the tombs, this is Herbert West, the Re-Animator. That is perfect. And so I just wanted to mention that. I love just going deep and discovering things. And sometimes all you need is your ever faithful copy of Webster's 1828, which is my go-to. No other dictionary unless I absolutely have to, but Webster's 1828 is my go-to. And just an amazing, so you kind of get this notion, and it comes at a perfect time when Part 5 now concludes, and we lead into the final piece, the climax of the story, in which Lovecraft was working piece by piece, almost like Frankenstein itself, putting together piece by piece a work of madness that will find its final climax in the final part, which is next. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for any possible comments you may drop. And as always, we end these things off with Go Bills.
This is not a dream. Not a dream. We might be useful to you.